You'd have panic attack the night before, and the night before, and the night before, and the night before. But there's definitely more advice that is good for a startup than don't die. Like, you should also do a lot of other things. Like, a lot of other people would not be up at 2 a.m. to fix your cluster. You would just get screwed. No, says the AI lab. Just give us the bare fucking metal. We made it possible for a lot of projects to get off the ground that otherwise would have never been able to buy from anybody.
What was that first year like?
Horrible. The first year was horrible.
What were the bad parts?
Like literally every 30 days, if we didn't sell out, we would go bankrupt. Hi, I'm Evan Conrad, and I'm the CEO of San Francisco Compute. What got me into programming? Should we do like the real answer, or should we do the non-real answer?
What is the non-real answer?
The non-real answer is I was bored with a laptop. The more real answer was I was bored with a laptop, and also my grades were horrible because I had panic attacks all the time. And so, because I grew up with like really severe panic disorder, and so I was in and out of like, you know, every few days I would have like quite significant panic attacks, periods. Like I would have a panic attack every day, and it's very hard to be good in school with that. I had done a little bit of programming in high school, and then in college, my grades were really terrible. But if you got good at programming, you could still get a job afterwards. There was like a thing you could do if you knew how to make good products. It was like the alternative path that you could take. I think that's like the much more real answer. Because otherwise, I would have gone and become like a policy or civics person. Because there was definitely like a period in time in which I wanted to do like politics of some sort, and then, but I was definitely not going to be able to do that path with the whole panic attack thing. You would like go in for a test, and not only would you have a panic attack during the test, you'd have panic attack the night before, and the night before, and the night before, and the night before. And so any opportunity in which you could study for the test or do anything would be like completely screwed. Like you were just, but then it would be like in waves. So there would be periods of time in which you would be fine, and then you can do fine in school, and then there'd be periods of time in which you're like dead. So very hard to maintain a normal like grade world. And for many other careers or many other things that you want, you do actually have to get good grades in school. But I in college, I think was the bottom of my class who graduated. I don't know if I literally was, but I definitely had a low enough GPA that it was like just at the cutoff, just where you could still get the degree, but like really bad, like really horribly bad. But I made like a whole bunch of products that I think landed me a job afterwards. After college, I moved to San Francisco to work at a company called Segment. Segment was an excellent company with a lot of like extremely talented engineers. And it was only like maybe like a year into working at Segment in which I did a bunch of cognitive behavioral therapy and meditation, and that like killed the panic attacks. But one of the things you do when you are trying to get over panic disorder is you do things that make you afraid. It's like exposure therapy. So if you are like particularly afraid of a thing, you have to like go do it. And so I was just trying to do this for all sorts of things at the time. And I had sat in a coffee shop in San Francisco, and there were these like folks who came in a bird suit. And I was like, why are you in a bird suit? Because, you know, you ask these sorts of questions for people who walk in the door with a bird suit. And they helpfully responded that they were starting a startup, and the startup brought the amusement park to you. And that was why they were in a bird suit, because they were doing some sort of event for it. And they talked about Y Combinator, and they were going through the batch at the time. And they talked about their interview process and the whole thing. And it sounded really terrifying to me. And so I was like, okay, I guess I should apply to this thing because it seems like a scary experience. And I was just doing scary experiences at the time. And at the time, I applied with the thing that I had, which was this like cognitive behavioral therapy app, because I was going through trying to get over panic attack disorder, and I had made like a gym app. Like if you go to the gym and you record your exercises or something, I had done the same genre of thing. I think like lots of people end up doing this, but did the interview, got in. Now you have to actually do a startup. Didn't really know what startups were very well. It definitely seemed like everybody else there like knew what YC was to a pretty significant degree. They like knew how to do startups, and I felt like I had just like bumbled into this and definitely didn't really know what I was doing. And so the only thing I think I really understood at the time was that you should just try not to die, that you have like a limited amount of money and you just like don't die. So when the first thing didn't work out, I was like, okay, the rest of the batch is like pivoting around. And so I'm like, okay, well, I will go and try something else. And so then I launched into like a series of like 20 different products because I don't think I was like particularly attached to anything other than the don't die. Like if you just keep going, you will just eventually, something will happen. And that kind of worked. I also feel like I mildly went insane. I think I just like got very struck on that. And I don't know if that's actually the best. There's definitely more advice that is good for a startup than don't die. Like you should also do a lot of other things, which I was not aware of at the time. Much more aware of it now. But I do think what that did is it got me very fine-tuned on like what things work as products and make money and do things. If you just try a whole bunch of shit, eventually I think you develop a better intuition for it. And so that went on for like 4 years until that eventually wound down. Eventually I get roped in with my then neighbor, Alex, to do AI grant, and so we ended up doing the first batch of AI grant and like running it. Still not entirely sure what to do, but eventually what this ends up being is Alex and I then go off and start this, which was San Francisco Compute. Though it wasn't originally San Francisco Compute. Originally we were going to go train an audio model, which the plan was like at the time Stable Diffusion had sort of become this sort of bigger thing. ChatGPT had just come out. It was kind of clear that there was going to be a music or an audio version of this as well early on. This is maybe pre-Suno or Udio, but if we had gone further on it, what we would end up in is probably something a lot like Suno or Udio. And so our plan was raise a little bit of money, get it to market, and basically burst up to a large amount of compute for a short period of time. And then we could get to market with it. Then we could raise the next round, and so on and so on. Problem with that is that none of the GPU clouds would sell us just a month at a time or a week at a time or an hour at a time for a large amount of compute, because they themselves have a loan that they got to pay for over like 3 years at least. And if they just sold you a month at a time, they always have to wonder who's going to buy the next month. And this is like very distinctly different than the way normal cloud providers worked, because in GPUs, volumes are really high and margins are really small. And so the risk that the market goes down like 10% is like a big deal for them. Anyway, that meant for us, we couldn't buy. And so our way of doing this, the way that we were going to buy, is that we would just buy for a year anyway, and then sublease 11 months. So we would kind of split it with a whole bunch of other folks. And we thought this would be a reasonable plan because we weren't thinking that hard. We thought, okay, well, this is like the only other option. Otherwise, our little startup is going to die pretty much immediately. Can't ever get off the ground. And so we did this, and then our audio model company immediately turned into what was sort of initially like a cloud provider, where we had this cluster. We really had to sell it to just kind of like anyone who would want to use it for a period of time. And this was kind of cool. We were like very bad at running the cluster in the beginning, though I think kind of everybody was very bad at running the clusters. H100s are like super notoriously flaky, and they just kind of like broke all the time. The like cool part about this is that we were sort of the only place where you could get a large cluster for a short period of time, which meant that we made it possible for a lot of projects to get off the ground that otherwise would have never been able to buy from anybody, like ourselves. Within like a month, we were San Francisco Compute instead, because we ended up with this big GPU cluster that we had to sell. Same company, but we just like renamed it to San Francisco Compute. Plan initially for the first year of the company was just like don't die, which had a lot of experience with.
What was that first year like?
Horrible. The first year was horrible.
What were the bad parts?
Like literally every 30 days, if we didn't sell out, we would go bankrupt. Every 30 days. And then additionally, all the clusters broke all the time. So like they're totally things related to us. Like we like, you always have outages, you have problems, any infrastructure company's hard. But also just the H100s broke all the time. And this wasn't the case for us in particular. It was the case for like the entire market. But what would happen is like the cluster would break, and then like customers would obviously be upset that the cluster has broken. And so then we would like pay out refunds to people on behalf of this cluster, but then we wouldn't necessarily get refunds from the underlying provider. And so we were just squeezed on both sides. And so I would like go down to like talk to the customer and be like, hi, please, like we are trying so hard. fully understand their perspective as well, like, because they bought a cluster and it's super fucking expensive, and it broke on them.
Wait, so there's the underlying. When you say provider, you're saying like data centers?
Yeah, like the underlying data center.
So data centers wouldn't refund you?
Not initially, not obviously, because I think at that point in the market, I think many folks still did not get how high the failure rate was for H100s. First, many people who had bought GPUs didn't know to do things like burn-ins. So when you buy a GPU cluster today, like if you're smart and competent, what you do is you go and run this thing called linpack for like 48 hours or longer, and 7 days if you can. And what you're doing is you're basically like stress testing the GPUs to just get the ones that are gonna fail to fail immediately, so they don't fail for the customer. At the time, it was like not obvious to some providers that you should do this. Anyway, so what this meant is that GPUs would fail all the time, and they would just break in weird and unexpected ways. And the more you had, the more they broke. Because if there's a 1 in 100 chance of failure rate, but you have more than 100 GPUs, you're gonna like guarantee to see this all the time. And so this would fail, and like each time it failed, for us, because we were noobs at the time, it would be like both new to us and then also new to the customer and also new to the data center. So it was like a lot of financial stress, and a lot of technical stress. You end up with like risk on both sides of just, if you don't sell this thing, you're gonna go bankrupt. Also, if it dies, you're gonna go bankrupt. So in both capacities, you have massive risk that you have to deal with that can just like blow up your business. And I guess the way that we survived was some combination of dumb luck, some combination of just trying really, really hard, and some combination of it just really sucking for like a long time. Like really, really sucking for us, sucking for everybody who worked with us, sucking for the customers, sucking for the vendor, sucking for everybody, like sort of the entire team here. Tremendous amount of just like up in the middle of the night, to the point where our brand for a while was that we would just be the people who would be up at 2 a.m. for you. Because like, I don't think it was unique to us. Like, it was definitely sucking for everyone in the entire industry. We, like, the people who had worked with lots of different GPU providers, liked us, or like the people who did like us, because we would be up at 2 a.m. Because like a lot of other people would not be up at 2 a.m. to fix your cluster. You would just get screwed. Where we would actually try really, really hard, to the deep stress of everyone here, to fix your cluster for you. It's like really bad when you have a startup who has functionally no assets and no money whatsoever take on a massive liability. And basically all the GPU clouds and all the AI labs were these parties. They really did not have the balance sheet to take on this amount of risk. And so the way that they solved that is they went out and raised large amounts of money from investors. But then the investor holds the risk, and it's not necessarily the thing they wanted to do in the first place. The like optimal solution here is you end up with a market, and what the market lets you do is it lets you say, oh, GPU cloud, you need to sell for 6 months. It's really important that you have at least 6 months sold, because otherwise your risk is too large. And AI lab number 1, you need to buy for 3 months. AI lab number 2, you need to buy for 1 month. And then there's that like 2-month block remaining somewhere. And in the current market, what would have happened is we would have bought the cluster, and we would have functionally bought that 2 months of risk. But what you need to have happen is you need somebody else to buy that 2 months of risk. You need some period of time, somebody else to buy, say, okay, I have this block of compute, and I'm going to buy this whole thing, and I'm going to sell immediately to the people who want the 4 months. But then that 2-month period, I'm going to take the risk on. Plan to do the market, pretty much built out of us being this broker in which we were functionally doing the market, but manually with, just calling people on the phone. And there was a room downstairs that would functionally be the market. And what would happen is Eric and Ethan on our team, one would get a call from somebody who's trying to buy a big cluster, and the other one would get a call from somebody who's trying to sell a cluster. And you would sort of, on a spreadsheet, like pair these folks up, and you would end up with these like rectangles of like, somebody's trying to buy for this amount of time. These other 2 people are trying to buy for, these periods of time. And so you like start negotiating with all the different parties to be like, okay, well, will you take this slot? Will you take this slot? And so on. And what happens is functionally from the buyer's perspective and the seller's perspective, you're getting our quote. So we will quote a price to you, and then we'll quote a price to the seller. And like you're operating with us as the intermediary party, but it's a market. In CPUs, imagine your Gusto, your payroll software. Maybe you make like $1 million, and you're gonna spend like $10,000 on your underlying CPUs. As you scale up, you might make $100 million, and you've scaled up to only like $20,000 of underlying CPUs, or maybe $30,000 or so on. And what's happened is your maybe those numbers are wrong, but your total amount of money that you're making relative to your CPUs has gone up over time. The more you scale, the farther your underlying COGS from your revenue is. Whereas in GPUs, that's just not the case. In GPUs, your revenue goes up and your COGS go up, which means there's always the same margin that your AI lab is making as you grow, as you continue. And that means that you're always cost sensitive. So for your CPU customer, maybe they start out cost sensitive, but then they make a ton of money, and then they don't care at all. And then your GPUs, they're cost sensitive in the beginning. They're cost sensitive. The more money they make, they're even more cost sensitive because the total volumes have gone up. And now they really have to optimize everything. And that fundamental difference is why there is risk in the compute market. And it's why nothing works the same way. Because as you scale up, let's say you're buying $1 billion of compute. And your underlying cloud provider says, I want 10% margins, and I'm gonna justify those 10% margins by making excellent software on top of it. I've got this whole training platform, and I've got really great RBAC and all sorts of stuff. And I'm gonna charge you $100 million for that, my 10% margin that I wanted, right? No, says the AI lab, just give us the bare metal, because for $100 million, I will hire an entire team. For the hyperscaler, this is a worse business model than what they were already doing. Because what they were doing before is they were taking their money, they were spending a small amount of it to get high margins on their CPUs from customers who don't churn and stick with them forever. However, now they're buying these big GPU clusters, they're selling them for a low margin to customers who will totally churn if they get the opportunity and can get a better price. And what they could have done with that money is they could have gone and spent it on building their own chips, cutting into NVIDIA's margins. They could have bought the compute and then trained their own models on top of it and then made money as competing with OpenAI or some of the other labs. And then they would have made a consumer product and made margin from there. But one of the worst businesses for them to be in is purely reselling NVIDIA because it does not work like their traditional business model. However, if you are not a hyperscaler and you are instead someone who might be in real estate, or maybe you have a fund, and what you are really good at is taking large amounts of money and making and very carefully doing the financial engineering to squeeze out margin on it, then this actually looks like a fantastic business. They're reasonable real estate businesses that you can make a lot of money on if you bet on the depreciation curve right. This is not a good position for the hyperscaler, but it is a great position for people who are looking up and thinking this is a better business than what I'm currently doing. We put up billboards. A lot of people in San Francisco have seen the billboards, I think. The reason for the billboards is that we had a large cluster we had to sell. Functionally, that's why we did it, and billboards are, we think, a reasonably effective strategy in a way that I think a lot of people don't always. There's a common thing, especially in venture startups, that you want to be able to hyper optimize your conversion rate and tracking whether or not your ad spend actually contributed to a thing. And at the time, we just did not have time for any of this. If we didn't sell the cluster in 30 days, that would be the end of the company. So it just didn't matter. Throw up the billboard, let's go. And then the total amount of money that we needed to make from those billboards was one sale. So one sale would have paid for the entire billboard. So I think that was the idea. The one Caltrain station one that I think a lot of people have seen came together 5 hours before we actually had to submit the design. So the reason why the design was so simple is not purely just us being simple as a thing, but it was also just a natural part of, we need to do this right now and we have no time. So white page, San Francisco compute on the name, friendly local supercomputer, let's go. Nothing else. Our later billboards had a lot more thought and plan into them and sort of strategy around them. I almost wanted to advertise San Francisco itself, which is maybe not the most ideal thing from a company perspective, but it did. I do think it was very useful both to us but also to the city, in that one of the things that I feel extremely proud of and also really like is that many people, when they hear about our brand, they describe it as optimistic about San Francisco. And I am the most optimistic about San Francisco. What brought me to San Francisco was nominally a job, but I remember when we were kids, we would always take road trips down here, and it was always the end destination, and then we would turn around once we got to San Francisco. So I think internally in my head, I had interpreted San Francisco as like the location in which you end up. You go on a long journey and you end up in San Francisco. But then I like got here and I think I just fell in love with the city. In part because it's the only city in which there is like true optimism. And if you were not in San Francisco, it is really hard to understand what that means. Just because I think pretty much every other culture in the world is not like really optimistic. And the way that you can tell in San Francisco, the people around you are optimistic, is because when you quit your job, everyone says congratulations. When you go and you say, hey, I'm gonna go spend the like next 10 years of my life trying to cure death, like no one bats an eye at all. Like you can say the craziest, and everyone in SF is really down to kind of go with it, in the sense that they believe that things are actually possible, that problems are solvable, and it's not just a belief in a sort of like, ooh, I like have this sort of faith that it will happen. It's because they've seen it over and over again. Just frankly speaking, there's a power law to where things get done in the world, and almost all of the important critical things that have happened that actually make the world better in some capacity have happened, at least in some part, in San Francisco. It just is the case that this is where the front of the world is. You can go to other cities, you can say, oh, there's like a tech industry there, or there's capital there, or there's totally like startups, or there's interesting things going on there. But it's just so much more in San Francisco. It really is where the world is steered from. There's like bits of San Francisco elsewhere. The same culture is elsewhere, but almost universally, whenever you find a culture that is optimistic, you find that the same groups of people all just like regularly take trips to San Francisco. They're like all connected to the same groups of people here. And this is like the source of it. Like one of the reasons why San Francisco is a worthwhile place to be optimistic about is because this is actually where the future is made. And it is made because of the customers that we work with. And so I just wanted to hype up the city because so many of the folks that we work with are here. And they're like direct personal friends, and they've like slept on our couches, and like we've met them in person over and over and over again. And that's a thing you don't always get to do when you make software, because oftentimes your customers all around the world, you don't necessarily get to like meet them and be with them. And there's not always a sense of like physical regional community with them, but there is in San Francisco. If you want a large GPU cluster, come to sanfranciscocompute.com. We can get you a very large burst for a very short period of time and save you a lot of money. We're always hiring, especially hiring systems engineers. If you know a lot about Linux, please come join us.